Hello everybody, and welcome to my lecture on this unit called Technical Reading and Strategic Writing. There is a lot packed into this unit, and this is a very short unit in this course. So you really have to pay attention to this lecture. I'll try to go through it as quickly as I can, and I think I'll prepare you very, very well for what lies ahead. So anyway, technical reading and strategic writing, what's in this particular unit? We're going to talk about reading both the content and the context of documentation in technical writing. We're going to talk about tone of voice in writing, which is very important. I'll explain that shortly. And we'll talk about strategic business writing, because this lecture is associated with the professional sequence of this technical writing class. And under strategic business writing comes these areas: business sustainability, professional reputation, stakeholder theory, and then personnel conflicts and ethical dilemmas. All of this is compressed into this particular unit, which I'm going to begin right now. So I want you to take a look at this email. Just read it, and we'll talk about it in a second. So let's take a look at it. I'll give you about 10 seconds to read this. Okay, maybe that was more than enough time, okay? So you just saw this email is to me from a student who wants to get into the class. I have a question for you. What does this student lack? Well, I'll tell you what this student lacks. There's a few things, and this is important. First of all, this student lacks an awareness of his or her audience. This student is writing to a professor, and the professor has a certain degree of control and over who gets into the class and so on. And obviously the professor wants someone to come into class who's good, who's qualified. And that particular email does not give that sense, which means that the student writer is not thinking of the professor. The student is writing as if just writing to friends or texting or something. It lacks an appropriate tone of voice. It is not what I would call a respectful sounding email. And it just doesn't have a good style of writing, or what's called a readable style of writing. Punctuation, misspellings, it just doesn't look good or sound good. So what the student really lacks is what I would call a strategy. The student just didn't think through some very basic things that he or she needed to think through before sending this email, and probably the student will not get into the class, especially if the professor is receiving emails from other students who want to get into that class. So let's begin this whole segment, this whole unit, by just looking at a document, and then I'll tie it back into what I just showed you right now. So I'm going to show you a document. I don't want you to read it. I just want you to look at it. Here it is. Just look at this document. Don't read it. You'll read it shortly, okay? So first question, this is a very easy question. What type or genre, that's a term we use, what type or genre of document is this? I'll give you a hint. This is a very, very easy question, and the answer is this is an email, okay? You can see it's an email. Now, the email is actually based on a much more formal kind of classical business document that is really sort of going out of style these days because of email, and that's called the memo. Back in the old days before emails, people would convey information through what's called memos. And we know that the email is based on the memo because of the way it's structured, particularly its format, which is modeled on a classical memo format. So now let's take a look at this in the classical memo style. You'll be writing a memo, so let's be sure we know how to do that, okay? Here is the memo version of that email. Don't read it, just look at it. And you can see it's somewhat similar to the email, but it also is quite different. It has, for example, a letterhead at the top. It says memo on it, memorandum, and it has a different kind of feel from the email. It's a print document, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this email again, and we're going to read it technically. So what does that mean? When you read a document technically, as it says here on the screen, you pay attention to certain things, and I want you to pay attention to the following. The design, the document's visual appearance, always begin there. Before you begin reading it, look at it, and be sure that you get an understanding of how the document feels based upon how it's set up. It's actually very important, as you will see, not just in the world, but in this class. I want you to pay attention to the details as well. This is information that you really ought to remember in the document. And this is the hardest thing of all, especially in this day and age when we're so used to kind of reading things fast and scrolling and kind of speed reading through things. It's really hard to focus and read for the details, but unfortunately, that's something we have to do in a class like this and in the professional world that we'll be joining. Pay attention as well to the writer's style, or what's called tone of voice. This is what you hear when you read it. I'll come back to that, but every type of writing can be heard. You kind of listen to it as you read it, and there's a voice that comes across, and that actually plays a very significant role in the reception of that information. And finally, pay attention to the writer's writing strategy. This is what the writer wants you to do or think. And we frequently do not pay attention to this at all, but we really need to, especially when we deal with complex situations like the one you'll be dealing with in this particular unit of the class. So, you do this last thing by asking yourself a simple question, all right? And it is this: does their writing work in this particular situation? Okay? So, this particular email, I think we can agree, this does not work. The writer fails on all accounts. There is no good strategy in this particular email, okay? So, now, I want to have you do an assignment right now. It's very similar to what you'll be doing in this unit and being quizzed on in a couple days. So let's read a document and remember the details. So I'm going to actually ask you to read a document. You don't have to pay attention looking at it. Read it and remember all the important details about it. And then I'm going to give you a quiz on it. So here's the first document. It's the memo we just looked at. I want you to read this. This is one version I'm going to show you. I want you to read this. When I count to 3, I want you to pause this video, read the document carefully, and then play again, and we'll continue. Okay? So read the details. When I count to 3, 1, 2, 3, pause. Okay, hopefully you've paused and read the document. So now I want to do something else. I want to now give you a second version of this particular document, and I want you to do the same thing. When I count to 3, I want you to pause this video and read it and pay attention to the details. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so you've read both documents carefully, and I'm sure you will agree that they are very different, even though the information in both of them is the same. So now I'm going to give you a quiz. Let's take this quiz, all right? So here we go. This will prepare you for the quiz you're going to be taking this in this unit. What is the name of the company? Is it ACAP, 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 or ACAP? Well, the answer to that is number 3, ACAP. That's how it's spelled. Next question. What is the writer Deborah Ackerman's position at ACAP? You remember that particular detail? Is it project manager, assembly manager, intake manager, or distributions manager? The answer to that question is distributions manager. Okay? What is the date on which the new policies will be instituted? Is it August 3rd, August 10th, August 13th, or August 20th? The answer to that is August 10th. And now a harder one. The new policy states that all material distributed by ACAP will now be categorized according to what? Is it delivery method and region? Is it region and product type and date, or date, region, and type? And this is actually important information that you need to know. And if you remembered it, I'm impressed. It's also very hard. This is the answer, region and product type. So if you got them all correct, then you're doing a pretty good job, and I think you're really prepared for the quiz that you'll be taking shortly. Now I want to talk about another important thing about writing and going back to these two documents, and that is the tone of the documents. The tone is like the feel, or as I said earlier, the voice of the document that you kind of hear or listen to when you read carefully and closely. The tone is conveyed in 2 ways. It's conveyed through the visual design of the document as well as through the writing style of the document. The feel of the document is visual as well as written. So here we have next to each other 2 versions of this memo. And you can see just by looking at the design that there's a difference between them, and one gives off a certain tone as opposed to the other. Let's look at one of these individually. The tone given off by this particular memo is very formal because of all of the following reasons. here we can look at these. Okay, because of all of those features and others, the tone actually works. It's appropriate for this particular document because it's aimed at an audience at a larger corporation or a government agency that has a very traditional formal culture, okay? And especially government agencies, this kind of language is used in agencies and in government settings and so on. It's a very kind of mechanical, extremely corporate way of writing. This particular memo is quite different. It has an informal tone. I'm sorry if you can't see the whole word there because my picture is in the way, for all of the following reasons. This document works as well for audiences at small companies or at large companies that have a very informal or progressive culture. For example, Google would be one of those. It's a huge corporation, but it strives to have a very employee-centered, relaxed, hip kind of culture. This kind of document is totally appropriate for Google or for smaller startup companies and so on. So both documents work. But because they have a clear sense of the audience, the setting that they're in, and the strategy employed is pretty much the same. They want you to pay attention to information. The strategy here is informal. It works for this particular audience, just like the other more formal document would work for that formal audience as well. So my question now is, does the following email I'm about to show you work? So I'm going to show you an email. I will read it out loud, just the email part of it, and then you tell me if you think it works. Here we go. I just put into place a new set of policies regarding how we will distribute all ACAP products beginning August 10th. All orders will be sorted by region and product type rather than by date received. Please familiarize yourselves with them. We're in the process of making a new employee bulletin board and hope to hang it up soon. Be sure, check it out for information regarding these changes and other ACAP related stuff. Deb. Okay. Does this work? Well, I actually don't think it does for a number of reasons, and here are a few reasons. First of all, I think it has a very loud tone to it. It's too loud. It's like she's screaming at me with all of these capital letters and the multiple exclamation marks. Also, look at that. There should be an apostrophe there. That word is were, not where. Information is spelled wrong. Board is spelled wrong. Look at that. The word policy is spelled polices, and it even appears in the subject line of this particular email. So I'm afraid to say that this email does not work, and there are consequences when you send out an email like this. Let's take a look at one of them. So here we are looking at another email. The email we just read and critiqued is right here. You can see that it is being forwarded by this person to that person, okay, within this particular company. And here is the email that, here's what's being said in this email. Police changes? Okay, Deb, I will be sure to look at these new polices. Hope they're in uniform when I do. Woo! Okay. So this particular employee is making fun of Deborah Ackerman, and they're all having a laugh behind her back. But what I think is even more serious about this particular blunder on Deb's part is this right here. It's being CC'd to somebody who seems to be external to the corporation, outside of the corporation. So this joke is being played outside of the little tight-knit group of people who work in a certain office. And there are consequences for that. And that's when we get into, I'm sorry if you can't see the whole word here, something that matters in this unit, which is our professional reputation, both of ourselves as professionals, but also of the company that we frequently represent, or the institution or the organization that we represent. Reputation is so crucial in this electronic age when there's people reviewing you left and right on Yelp and all these different websites, that there's actually a whole business enterprise called reputation management out there to help you manage your reputation, and if you have a bad one, fix it as much as you can. And if you just Google reputation management, you'll see all of these ads come up for companies that specialize in this. So it really is a big thing, and it's really something we need to be conscious of. Take a look at this quote here. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently. That is by Warren Buffett. I want you to think about that, and I want you to be just aware of the importance of maintaining a good professional reputation in this world, as well as of the company that you may work for or may be an administrator for, because it really matters in this unit. I'm not going to say too much more about it, but there are links in the assignment that will take you to websites where you can read more about this on your own. For now, because I want to keep this lecture going, I want to emphasize this word here, thinking differently and acting differently, because we have to do that depending on the situation that we're in. As I just showed you, there are two different ways to compose a memo based upon your knowledge of audience, the kind of tone of voice you choose, the kind of strategy that you employ. You have to do things differently depending on a number of different factors. So I'm going to use this word differently to jump on to the next kind of vital issue we'll be talking to, which are two different corporate models that you should be aware of in this particular unit, because we'll be employing one over the other. And here is a very complex, complicated slide that you're like, oh my God, I don't want to read this right now. He's probably going to spend 20 minutes talking about this slide. The good news is you don't have to read it, and I'm not going to spend 20 minutes on this boring slide. I just grabbed this from the internet and wanted to share it with you because of this right here. This particular model is called the shareholder model. And as you can see, the shareholder or shareholders are central to this particular business model. Everything revolves around them. And that is kind of the classic business model. And a lot of people actually think this of, how do I say it? In the business world, a lot of people still subscribe to this model very, very diligently. However, it's not the only model out there. Another model that I think is actually very important in this age and is vital to this particular unit that we're in right now is called the stakeholder model. And it's quite different. As you can see, investors really matter in this model, but they're kind of treated equally with other constituencies, such as the customers and employees and the community and the interest group. And central to the model is the company itself, not just the shareholders. And the company has got to be sustainable. It's got to survive. And that means in order to survive, you have to focus on more constituencies than just the shareholders and the real world. And this requires a type of strategic thinking that sometimes doesn't come across in how we do business with people. So the shareholder model briefly is this. A firm is seen as being owned, and the managers of that firm are obliged to maximize wealth for the owners or the shareholders, as opposed to the stakeholder model, in which a firm is an independent entity like a person, and the managers are obliged to serve the good of everyone who is affected by the firm's actions. And we call everyone stakeholders. And this is an important model to be aware of in this particular unit. Who is a stakeholder? Real quickly, I'll just answer that question. Here it is. It's an individual, a group, or a community of people who can affect a company or be affected by a company's actions. And traditionally, we divide stakeholders into two types. There are primary stakeholders who are internally or contractually connected to the company, and then there are secondary ones who are external to that company. And we sometimes will privilege the primary over the secondary ones, and we do need to do that. We have to take care of ourselves, but we cannot factor out external stakeholders, because ultimately, in a large community, whether it's a certain industry community in New York City or a small kind of agricultural community in Western New York, everyone plays a role. Everybody matters once you really start to look at things in the big picture. So now I want to kind of move on to the last thing that we'll be dealing with in this particular unit, and it kind of brings all of everything I've said in this lecture together, and that is dealing with conflict in the workforce specifically. And sometimes some of the conflicts that we deal with are resolvable. We can fix them. Other times we can't. And in this unit, we're going to be looking at a conflict that is not easily fixable. And when we have something like that, it's frequently a dilemma that sometimes there's a way out of. And in this unit, the assignment you'll be doing in this unit, if you really pay attention, there's actually a pretty easy way out of it. But ultimately, you have to think about it ethically. And you have to think about the numerous stakeholders, the people out there who be affected by the decision that you make as an administrator, which You'll see all that when you read the assignment. Anyway, an ethical dilemma is this. It's a complex situation that often involves an apparent conflict between moral imperatives in which to obey one would result in transgressing another. I wouldn't say that the dilemma that you're dealing with in this particular unit is necessarily an ethical dilemma, but it does require you to think ethically about it. The key to this particular definition that you see on your screen right now in front of you is this word here. Sometimes a conflict is really, at the deeper level, not really a conflict. It just appears to be a conflict. And the wise administrator or the wise negotiator, the person who seeks to deal with this conflict or help resolve it, is aware that maybe at the fundamental level, there's really not a conflict after all, even though people are not getting along. That is a really good thing to keep in mind if you think strategically. Business ethics is kind of a word we give to when we take ethical dilemmas and apply them to workplace situations like you'll be doing in this particular unit. According to Carter McNamara, a guy out there who knows a lot about business ethics, he says this: coming to know what is right or wrong in the workplace and doing what's right in regard to the effects of products, services, and relationships with stakeholders, that is business ethics. Stakeholders is a word that he uses here. I just wanted to point that out to you. This is nice, but he also says there is no clear moral compass to guide leaders through complex dilemmas about what is right and what is wrong. So frequently when you are involved with a dilemma or a conflict, you really have to investigate it, explore it, study it, and think about it. Don't just take a knee-jerk, immediate, I'm going to fix this kind of approach, because that could actually work against you in major ways. So just be aware of that, okay? Whenever you do, be aware that any kind of action that you do on behalf of an organization must promote the sustainability of that particular organization. Sustainability is a word that we use here at Alfred State College quite a bit, and it frequently is applied to green technologies, the environment. But sustainability is also something that a word that we use when we talk about just having an organization, a school, a college, a company, or whatever, survive in a competitive environment. So just be aware of that. So take a look at this here. Here we have a network of people and a community of people. And some of those people work for a company or belong to an organization, and others of them do not. And there's a line. We put here a line between those who work for the company, internal, and those who do not, external. Now, if there is any kind of a conflict between the company and the community, we have to be aware that the community sometimes can get together and create its own sort of organization outside of that company. But ultimately, the people on the outside are related to, in some ways, people who are on the inside. I mean, that's just the way it is. There's really no clear distinction between inside and outside, internal and external, company and community. And what happens is, if you belong to a little administrative element within a company that makes decisions that are just not resonating with the larger community, the whole company can be affected, and you may find yourself outnumbered by everybody else. And that can result in career suicide. It can result in the end of you. It could even result in the end of your company. So please bear that in mind. Another word that you need to know for this particular assignment, and kind of relates to everything we're talking about now, is constraints. Whenever you deal with any kind of conflict or any kind of a complex situation in business, there will be constraints. And frequently you will feel that you are boxed in by things, and you want to just kind of punch your way out and, make these walls go away. But as you do that, you realize that, there are people at the other sides of these walls that you have to contend with. You have to deal with them. It's not just a wall. There are people involved, and you need to be able to deal with these people, as well as policies and procedures and laws and so on, things that will really, really limit what you can do in trying to resolve a conflict or deal with some kind of a complex situation. So you need to be able to work within constraints and think about them in such a way that you can have a good outcome to whatever you are trying to accomplish. And that ultimately requires strategic thinking. I put a picture up here because when we play a game like chess, we're always thinking strategically, and we're trying to figure out what our opponent is thinking, what their next move will be so that we can block it. That is one way of thinking strategically and thinking competitively. But for this assignment, I think you should think more like putting a puzzle together. You're going to look at a number of different documents. You're going to look at a situation, and there's going to be many different little pieces that will slowly fall into place and that you're going to put together. And you need to put them together in such a way that you really grasp the whole situation, what is going on in it. And when you kind of do that, it is kind of fun. It's like a game. It's like a puzzle. And just so think of your approach to this assignment in those terms, and I think that will be a nice way of going about it. So strategic writing, finally I'm near the end of my lecture in case you're really bored and you're like, oh my God, will he ever get through this? I'm at the end. Think about, first of all, strategic writing is this. It's perfecting the art of professional writing, and professional writing is always dignified, respectful, and cordial. It's never authoritarian. It's never bossy. It's never rude and crude. I know we've looked at presidential elections, and the models that are out there are pretty bad. Don't follow them, okay? Because you're not going to succeed if you do. I promise you that. So just remember that all writing and all communication should be those ways. And also strategic writing should be persuasive. Any position you take, all the positions you take, should be the best possible ones for all stakeholders, and everyone must believe that your positions are ethical, fair, and make good business sense. That doesn't mean that they will be happy with the decisions that you make. That doesn't mean that they will be empowered by the decisions that you make. But if you persuade them that you've looked at it from all different angles, and this decision is the best possible one that you can make out of all the possible decisions that are out there, 8 times out of the 10, most people will accept it. Of course, there's always those 2 people that will fight and be, angry and so on. But your goal is to get most people to see you as having a strong strategy and having acted ethically and in the best interest of the common good. Okay? So, you're getting near the end still here. Your strategic purpose should always be this: study and understand the situation, make a business-savvy case, change the minds of skeptics, and if you do all that, everything will come to an end, just like this lecture, and hopefully it's an end that is positive for everybody. I hope you've learned a lot during this lecture. I tried to be to go about it as quickly as I could, so it's not too drawn out and boring. And now I just want you to go on and do the assignment and do it according to everything that I've told you in this lecture, and I think you'll probably do well. Thank you for watching.